The security system runs its diagnostic at 3 a.m. Motion sensors sweep empty hallways. Climate controls cycle through rooms no one occupies. In the basement, industrial dehumidifiers pull moisture from air that hasn't been breathed in months. Outside, landscape irrigation activates on schedule, feeding grass no one walks on, maintaining gardens no one sees. The estate is immaculate. Every system functions. Every surface gleams. The driveway could receive guests at any moment. The kitchens could serve dinner within the hour. Nothing is broken. Nothing is neglected. The maintenance is perfect. And that is precisely the problem. If a property costs $3 million annually just to remain empty, was it ever truly owned, or merely sustained until the arithmetic stopped working? The day construction ended, the most expensive phase began. The final inspection happened on a Tuesday in late spring. Contractors walked through with the developers, checking punch lists. Light fixtures, all operational. HVAC zones, all balanced. Marble floors, sealed and polished. The fountain in the entrance courtyard ran clear. Exterior lighting illuminated the facade exactly as the renderings had promised. The estate was finished. $200 million in construction costs spread across 4 years. 73,000 square feet of living space. Indoor pool, home theater, wine cellar that could hold 8,000 bottles. Staff quarters for 12. 6-car garage with hydraulic lifts and charging stations. Every detail had been executed. Every specification met. The architecture magazines would call it a triumph. The developers signed off. The estate was complete. The next morning, the bills started arriving. Climate control for a structure this size required constant oversight. The systems didn't pause because the rooms were empty. Server racks in the climate-controlled IT room drew power 24 hours a day, maintaining networks for security cameras that recorded hallways no one walked. The pool filtration system cycled 8,000 gallons every 6 hours, whether anyone swam or not. The landscaping contract specified weekly service, 14 gardeners, 2 days per week. Hedges required trimming to exact heights. Specimen trees needed monitoring for disease and stress. The lawn demanded fertilization on a precise schedule to maintain that particular shade of emerald that the original design had called for. Rain or shine, occupied or vacant, the gardens had to perform. Insurance costs reflected the property's replacement value. Underwriters calculated what it would cost to rebuild every square foot to the same specification. The premium arrived quarterly, $180,000. Coverage was not optional. Lenders required it. The estate's value demanded it. Property taxes followed a similar logic. Assessment was based on improvements, and this property represented improvements at a scale the county had rarely encountered. The tax bill reflected that reality. $750,000 annually, due in 2 installments. Security operated continuously. Cameras, motion sensors, perimeter alarms, all monitored from a central station. The contract included armed response within 6 minutes. 2 guards rotated shifts at the main gate, even though no residents had yet moved in. Their presence was not about current threat. It was about maintaining readiness, about ensuring that when someone eventually arrived, the security posture would already be established. These were not optional expenses. They were the baseline cost of keeping the estate in a state described, in property management terms, as move-in ready. And the estate had been move-in ready for 9 months. The arithmetic was straightforward. Climate control, $200,000 per year. Landscaping, $320,000. Security, $450,000. Insurance, $180,000. Property taxes, $750,000. Utilities for the main house and auxiliary buildings, $140,000. Pool and water features, $80,000. Technology systems and IT infrastructure, $60,000. The subtotal before any major repairs or improvements, $2,180,000 annually, to which had to be added management fees, legal compliance, licenses and permits, fire suppression system testing, elevator certifications, septic and well maintenance for a property not connected to municipal systems. The full operating cost settled near $3 million per year for a property no one lived in. The developers had known this moment would come. The business plan had accounted for carrying costs, but the plan had assumed a buyer within 6 months of completion. The estate had been designed for a specific tier of wealth: family offices, tech executives, finance principals, people for whom $3 million in annual operating costs represented less than 1% of net worth. The assumption had seemed reasonable during construction. Luxury real estate moved differently than mass market housing, but it moved. Comparable properties in the region, admittedly smaller but still substantial, had sold within their first year. 9 months in, the estate had received exactly 4 serious inquiries. 2 came from real estate agents fishing for publicity. 1 came from a production company scouting filming locations. The 4th came from a buyer whose financing fell apart during due diligence. The asking price was $120 million. Appraisers, working from comparable sales and replacement cost methodology, had supported that figure. On paper, the math worked. In practice, the market was silent. Completion had delivered a finished product, but it had also locked in a cost structure that ran whether the estate generated value or not. The systems installed to make the property luxurious now demanded constant feeding. The scale chosen to make it impressive now guaranteed expense at a level that exceeded what even patient capital could justify indefinitely. The developers reviewed the carrying costs monthly. Each month looked identical. Systems operational, property pristine, inquiries minimal, expenses relentless. Completion was supposed to mark the end of risk. Instead, it marked the beginning of a different kind of pressure. Construction debt could be structured and negotiated. Buyers could be courted. Marketing could be refined. But the boilers had to run. The lawns had to be cut. The insurance had to be paid. The estate was complete. The question of how to afford that completion was just beginning. This wasn't personal wealth. It was institutional confidence. The entity behind the estate appeared on documents as Pinnacle Summit Holdings LLC, a special purpose vehicle created specifically for this development. Behind Pinnacle sat a consortium, a family office from the Northeast with generational real estate holdings, a pension fund looking for alternative asset exposure, and a development group with a track record in high-end residential projects. None of the principals planned to live here. That was never the model. The logic was asset creation. Find land with the right characteristics, privacy, views, proximity to wealth centers, then build at a level the market couldn't provide. Luxury is always scarce by definition. True scarcity commands pricing power. The estate wasn't meant as a home. It was meant as an investment vehicle for someone else's home. An asset that would appreciate while providing its owner with utility and status. The family office contributed land, a 200-acre parcel acquired decades earlier, before the region became fashionable. Their basis was low. Holding costs were minimal. Developing the site converted dormant land into productive capital. The pension fund provided construction financing. Their mandate required diversification beyond equities and bonds. Real estate, particularly at the luxury end, offered low correlation with public markets. Returns came from 2 sources: eventual sale and interim appreciation. A well-executed estate could deliver both. The development group brought expertise. They had built compounds in Aspen, oceanfront estates in Malibu, vineyard properties in Napa. They understood the target buyer, the construction challenges, the permitting process, and the sales cycle. Their fee structure included development management fees and a percentage of profit at exit. The partnership reflected a specific economic moment. Wealth concentration at the top had reached levels unseen since the Gilded Age. Family offices managed trillions in assets. The ultra-high net worth cohort was growing faster than any other demographic segment. Demand for trophy properties outpaced supply, particularly properties that combined scale, privacy, and proximity to urban centers. The thesis was clear. There existed a buyer willing to pay $120 million for the right property. The challenge was to identify what right meant, then execute at a level that justified the price. Location came first. The site sat 90 minutes from a major city, close enough for convenience, far enough for seclusion. Mountain views in 3 directions. No visible neighbors. Zoning allowed for large lot development but limited density, ensuring the character of the area would remain intact. The architecture was commissioned from a firm known for modernist estates that photographed well. Clean lines, floor-to-ceiling glass, cantilevered structures that seemed to float above the landscape. The design vocabulary signaled sophistication and restraint, the opposite of ostentatious traditionalism. Materials were selected for permanence and status. Limestone from a specific Italian quarry. Hardwood flooring from reclaimed timber. Fixtures from European manufacturers whose names carried weight among design professionals. Every choice was defensible both aesthetically and financially. Quality materials age better, require less maintenance, and signaled that no compromise was made. The developers understood they were building not just a house, but a narrative. The story was, someone chose this site for its beauty, hired the best architects, sourced the finest materials, and created something singular. The estate wasn't just large, it was curated. Marketing began before construction finished. Renderings appeared in luxury real estate publications. Select brokers were given advance access to floor plans. A website launched with aerial video and architectural photography. Inquiries came in, mostly speculative, but they validated the concept. There was interest. The business plan modeled sale within 12 months of completion at $120 million. Costs were projected at $200 million for construction plus land basis. Marketing, carrying costs, and financing would add another $20 million over the development period. Total all-in cost, $220 million. Expected proceeds, $120 million. Profit to the partnership, $100 million, to be split according to capital contribution ratios. 20% return on capital over a 5-year development period. In alternative assets, that was attractive. The model contained assumptions. The primary assumption was that the buyer existed and would emerge within a reasonable time frame. That assumption rested on demographic trends, wealth data, and observed behavior in comparable markets. It seemed sound. But assumptions are not guarantees. The estate that the partnership built was extraordinary. It met every specification. It exceeded several. The craftsmanship was genuine. The finishes were flawless. As a physical object, it succeeded completely. As an economic object, it was a bet. The bet was that someone would value this property at $120 million. Not because of what it cost to build, but because of what it offered. A chance to live in a way almost no one else could. The developers were not naive. They knew luxury real estate could be illiquid. They knew sales cycles could extend. They had structured the deal to withstand delays. The pension fund was patient. The family office wasn't forced sellers. The development group had other projects. But patience had limits, and while they waited for the right buyer, the estate needed to be maintained. Systems had to run. Staff had to be paid. The property had to remain in showroom condition because the eventual buyer would expect perfection. Institutional confidence had built this place. That same confidence now required that the estate be preserved exactly as completed, indefinitely, regardless of cost, until the model proved itself out. The clock was running. The expenses were fixed. The buyer was theoretical. And institutional confidence, however deep, eventually answers to arithmetic. The estate didn't need buyers, it needed permanence. Embedded in the financial model, on page 47 of the offering memorandum, sat a single-line item. Estimated holding period, 12 months post-completion. 12 months. The assumption was never that the estate would sell immediately. Properties at this level required time. Buyers needed to be identified, qualified, courted. Tours had to be arranged. Financing had to be structured. Legal review took weeks. 12 months was the reasonable expectation, the professional estimate based on comparables and market conditions. The budget for that period was explicit: $3 million in carrying costs, marketing expenses of $500,000, broker commissions structured into the sale price. The partnership had allocated capital to cover this period without strain. The assumption underneath the assumption was different and more fundamental: that the estate would eventually sell. Not just that it could sell, but that it would. That somewhere in the global population of ultra-high net worth individuals, there existed a buyer for whom this property was the answer to a need they had. This assumption was so foundational that it was barely examined. It was treated as axiomatic, a given, the logical conclusion of having built something objectively excellent in a market with documented demand. But the assumption contained a vulnerability. Luxury goods follow different rules than commodities. A commodity is fungible. Wheat is wheat. 1 ton sells as easily as another because buyers need wheat, and the product is interchangeable. Luxury goods are positional. They signal status, taste, identity. They are not interchangeable. A buyer choosing between 2 estates is not solving a math problem. They are choosing a version of themselves. The estate had been built to a specification. The specification reflected what the developers believed the market wanted: modernist architecture, top-tier finishes, privacy, views, amenities. That belief was informed by sales data, broker feedback, and observed preferences in adjacent markets. But taste is not algorithmic. Preferences shift. What appealed to buyers 3 years ago when the design was finalized might not appeal to buyers today. Architectural trends move. Status markers evolve. A property designed to feel cutting edge can feel dated if the cultural wind changes direction. And at 120 million, the buyer pool was vanishingly small. Estimates vary, but most wealth analysts place the number of individuals globally who could afford a 9-figure residence without financial stress at somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 people. Of those, only a fraction would be interested in this region, this architecture, this particular expression of luxury. The addressable market might be 200 people, maybe fewer. Within that group, many already owned comparable properties. Others had specific needs: proximity to schools, access to airports, cultural institutions, that this location didn't meet. Others preferred different architecture. Some wanted ocean views. Some wanted historical properties with provenance. Some wanted compounds they could develop themselves. The pool narrowed further. The business plan had acknowledged this. It had not, however, fully reckoned with the implication. If the addressable market was 200 people, and 95% of them would decline for specific reasons, that left 10 potential buyers. If 5 of those were not currently in acquisition mode, the pool was 5. If 3 of those were unreachable or uninterested, the pool was 2. 2 people, globally, for whom this estate might be the right choice at the right time, at the right price. Finding those 2 people was not a 12-month marketing problem. It was a probability problem, and probability worked slowly. The estate, meanwhile, needed certainty. It needed its systems maintained. It needed its insurance paid. It needed to be preserved in move-in condition because degradation would make it unsellable. The model had assumed maintenance was a temporary cost. Pay for a year, sell, exit. But if the sale took not 12 months but 24, 36, the carrying costs doubled or tripled, profit margins compressed, return on capital declined. The project went from attractive to marginal. At 48 months, it went from marginal to underwater. The developers reviewed their options 6 months in. The estate had received inquiries, but no offers. Brokers reported strong interest, which in luxury real estate often means polite conversations that lead nowhere. The market, they said, was there. It just needed time. Reducing the price was discussed and rejected. Pricing sent signals. A reduction would indicate distress. It would raise questions about why the estate wasn't moving. It would undercut the carefully constructed narrative that this was a singular property worth every dollar of its asking price. Luxury assets cannot be discounted casually. The price is part of the product. Lower it and you change what you're selling. The decision was to wait. Continue marketing. Maintain the property impeccably. Trust that the right buyer would emerge. The partnership had capital. The family office was patient. The pension fund's investment committee wasn't panicking. Not yet. But the assumption that the estate would sell within a reasonable time frame was now under quiet, growing pressure. The property wasn't failing. It was simply existing in a state the model hadn't planned for: extended readiness. Every month of extended readiness cost $250,000. Every quarter, $750,000. Every year, $3 million. The estate didn't need buyers in the abstract. It needed a specific buyer, soon, who would stop the bleeding. What it had instead was permanence. A structure built to last centuries, systems designed for decades, materials chosen for durability, all of which had to be maintained whether anyone wanted them or not. The assumption buried in the business plan was that permanence was an asset. Under the right conditions, it was. But under the wrong conditions, permanence became a liability, an obligation that couldn't be abandoned because abandonment would destroy the value everyone was waiting to realize. The estate would be maintained. The costs would be paid. The model would be trusted, until the arithmetic made trust impossible. Luxury assets don't pause when unused. The estate's HVAC system contained 47 zones. Each zone regulated temperature and humidity independently, allowing different areas to be maintained at different set points. The wine cellar held steady at 58 degrees. The home theater stayed at 72. Guest bedrooms were set to 68 to save energy while remaining comfortable enough to be occupied on short notice. The system didn't know the rooms were empty. It only knew the target parameters and the current readings. When the temperature in the primary suite drifted half a degree above set point, the compressor engaged. Cool air moved through ducts. The temperature corrected. The system logged the cycle and went dormant until the next variance. This happened 30 to 40 times per day, across all zones, 365 days per year. The pool required more active intervention. Water temperature was maintained at 82 degrees year-round. The filtration system cycled the entire volume every 6 hours. 8,000 gallons drawn through pumps, passed through sand filters, treated with automated chemical dosing, and returned. pH levels were monitored continuously. Chlorine was dispensed according to calculated demand. Once per week, a pool technician arrived to test manually, calibrate sensors, and inspect equipment. Tiles along the waterline were brushed to prevent calcium deposits. Skimmers were cleaned. The automated vacuum was checked. The technician spent 90 minutes per visit and billed $1,200 per month. No one had swum in the pool since the final construction inspection. The landscaping was more visible and more complex. The estate's grounds included formal gardens, naturalized plantings, specimen trees, and 14 acres of maintained lawn. The design specified native grasses in the meadow areas, drought-tolerant perennials in the rock gardens, and hybrid tea roses in the beds flanking the motor court. Each plant type had different needs. The roses required weekly inspection during growing season, deadheading of spent blooms, and targeted treatment for black spot and aphids. The meadow grasses needed seasonal cutting but not weekly mowing. The specimen trees, Japanese maples, flowering dogwoods, a row of espaliered pears, required structural pruning, pest monitoring, and supplemental watering during dry periods. The landscaping contract was detailed and inflexible. The lead horticulturist had worked with the design team during construction. She understood the original vision. Her crew arrived every Monday and Thursday. 14 people working in coordinated teams. Mowing, edging, blowing, pruning, weeding, mulching, fertilizing. The estate looked perfect because it was maintained to a standard that treated aesthetics as non-negotiable. Inside the house, environmental controls protected not just comfort, but the materials themselves. Hardwood floors required humidity between 35 and 55%. Too dry and the wood contracted, creating gaps. Too humid and it swelled, causing cupping. The HVAC system modulated humidity precisely, supported by standalone dehumidifiers in the basement and crawl spaces. Textiles, upholstery on furniture that no one sat in, required protection from UV exposure. Motorized shades adjusted throughout the day, following the sun, keeping direct light off fabrics that would otherwise fade. The automation system calculated solar angles and triggered the shades without human input. Art hanging in the hallways and principal rooms required similar care. Temperature swings and humidity fluctuations damaged canvases over time. The environmental controls that kept the residents comfortable, if there had been residents, also preserved the artworks. The systems nested inside one another. Climate control protected the structure and the contents. Automation managed the climate control. IT infrastructure supported the automation. Backup power ensured the IT stayed online during outages. Each layer added complexity. Each layer added cost. And each layer was necessary. Removing anyone would create risk elsewhere. Deferred maintenance was not an option. Luxury properties at this level degraded faster than modest homes, not despite their quality but because of it. High-performance systems required high-performance upkeep. Precision equipment needed precision servicing. Materials chosen for beauty rather than durability demanded constant care. Let the HVAC maintenance slide, and compressors failed. Compressor replacement at this scale ran $30,000 per unit. Let the pool chemistry drift, and the tile grout degraded. Regrouting an 8,000-gallon pool cost $80,000. Let the landscaping lapse, and the specimen trees stressed. Replacing mature trees required cranes, root balls the size of small cars, and 5-figure invoices per tree. Deferred maintenance didn't save money. It transferred cost from operating expenses to capital expenditures, usually at a premium. The estate's management team understood this. They maintained everything. Oil changes for the backup generator on schedule. Filter replacements for the whole house water treatment system every 6 months. Annual inspection of the elevator, even though it carried no passengers. Quarterly testing of the fire suppression system. Biannual servicing of the gate automation. Every receipt was documented. Every service visit logged. The property manager kept spreadsheets tracking compliance with manufacturer recommendations, warranty requirements, and insurance stipulations. The estate was being run as if occupied, because the standards for luxury real estate didn't differentiate between occupied and vacant. The buyer, when they finally arrived, would expect perfection. Any sign of neglect, any deferred item, any aging system would reduce value or kill the deal entirely. So the maintenance continued. $3 million annually, like clockwork. keeping a property in a state of permanent readiness for an arrival that remained theoretical. Luxury assets don't pause, they perform or they degrade. There is no middle state. The estate had been built to perform, and performance, indefinitely maintained, was extraordinarily expensive. Downsizing was never possible once it was finished. At 73,000 square feet, the estate was not just large, it was purpose-built at a scale where every system was custom. Nothing was standard, nothing came off the shelf, and nothing could be removed without compromising the whole. The HVAC system exemplified the problem. A typical residential system cooled or heated discrete zones with independent units. If one area wasn't being used, that unit could be powered down. The estate system was integrated. 47 zones fed from central chillers and boilers. The equipment was sized for total load. Running it at partial capacity didn't reduce energy consumption proportionally because the core infrastructure, pumps, compressors, controls, had to operate regardless. Shutting down entire wings was theoretically possible, but practically complex. Closing vents in unused areas created pressure imbalances. The system had been designed to move air through the entire structure in a calculated pattern. Blocking circulation in one section affected flow elsewhere. Humidity accumulated in closed spaces. Mold risk increased. The solution required not just closing doors, but reconfiguring dampers, reprogramming controls, and monitoring for unintended consequences. Trials were run. The property manager closed off the guest wing for 3 months, believing it would cut costs. Energy bills dropped 9%, but humidity in the closed wing spiked. Condensation appeared on windows. A musty smell developed. When the wing was reopened and inspected, minor mold growth was found in 2 closets. Remediation cost $14,000. The savings from shutting down the wing for 3 months, $11,000. The experiment was not repeated. The pool presented a similar dilemma. Could it be drained and winterized to avoid the cost of heating and chemical treatment? Technically, yes, but draining an in-ground pool created hydrostatic pressure risks. Groundwater could push up on the empty shell, cracking the structure. Refilling later required days of filtering and balancing and didn't eliminate the risk of damage during the drained period. The pool contractor advised against it. The pool stayed full and heated. Landscaping offered no better options. The gardens had been designed as integrated compositions. The roses in the motor court beds were chosen to complement the stone color. The perennials in the cutting garden were arranged by bloom time to ensure seasonal interest. The specimen trees were placed to frame views. Removing high-maintenance elements, the roses, for instance, would leave visible gaps. The beds couldn't be converted to lawn without altering the estate's character. And that character was what justified the asking price. Buyers at this level expected perfection, not pragmatism. An estate that looked like corners had been cut would not sell for $120 million. It might not sell at all. The staff structure mirrored the property's scale. The estate employed a property manager, an assistant, property manager, 2 full-time maintenance technicians, a part-time IT specialist, and contracted services for landscaping, pool care, window washing, pest control, and security. Could staff be reduced? The property manager was essential. Someone had to coordinate vendors, handle compliance, and make decisions. The assistant property manager covered weekends and managed backup. The maintenance technicians addressed the constant minor issues. A door that didn't latch properly, a light fixture that flickered, a faucet that dripped. Eliminating positions would save salaries but increase contractor costs. Every service call from an outside vendor cost more than work done in-house. The math favored retaining staff. The same logic applied to contracted services. Could landscaping visits be reduced from twice weekly to once? Yes. Could the result be maintained at the same standard? No. The design was too intricate. Weeds established themselves quickly. Edges softened. Within 2 weeks, the degradation became noticeable. The estate was not a house that could be maintained casually. It was a curated environment. Curation required intensity and consistency. Dialing back intensity meant abandoning curation. And without curation, the estate became just another large house, not a $120 million trophy. The scale that made the estate impressive also made it inflexible. There was no version of this property that cost half as much to maintain. Cutting costs meant cutting corners. Cutting corners meant reducing value. Reduced value meant a harder sale at a lower price. The developers were locked in. They had built something extraordinary. That extraordinariness demanded extraordinary expense. Attempting to maintain the property on a budget would destroy precisely what they were trying to sell. So they paid, month after month, $3 million per year. The estate remained perfect. The carrying costs remained crushing. And the fundamental problem, that this property could not be downsized, could not be operated cheaply, could not be anything other than what it was, remained unsolved. The scale was the trap. It had been chosen deliberately, to impress, to justify the price. Now it was a constraint, locking everyone into a maintenance regime that couldn't be reduced without admitting that the property had been overbuilt. No one was ready to admit that. Not yet. But the arithmetic didn't care about readiness. An unused estate still has to perform. The primary suite had never been slept in, but its bed was made with hotel-quality linens, the pillows fluffed, the duvet straightened just so. Fresh flowers sat on the nightstand, replaced every Monday whether wilted or not. The marble bathroom counters gleamed. Towels hung precisely folded on heated racks. Readiness meant the estate could receive a showing with 4 hours' notice. Brokers brought serious buyers on short schedules. A tech executive flying through the region. A family office principal visiting a nearby property. These tours happened irregularly, 6 or 8 per year, but each one required the estate to be flawless. The showing preparation checklist ran 3 pages. Lights adjusted to optimal levels. Music playing softly in common areas. Fireplaces lit if weather permitted. Window treatments positioned for best views. Temperature set to 72 degrees throughout. No visible dust, no smudges on glass, no indication that the property sat empty between visits. The preparation took half a day. The property manager and her assistant moved through the house room by room, checking details. After the showing, another round of checks. Lights adjusted back to standby mode. Music off. Fireplace extinguished and cleaned. Any disturbance from the tour corrected. The buyers saw perfection. They did not see the effort required to stage perfection for their 2-hour visit. Readiness extended beyond the house itself. The motor court was kept immaculate. Not a leaf on the pavement, not a stain on the stone. When buyers arrived, they would see a driveway that looked like it had been installed that morning. The garages held no cars but were maintained as if they did. Floors epoxy-coated and polished. Lighting set to showroom levels. Hydraulic lifts tested monthly, even though they lifted nothing. The garage was part of the tour. It had to perform. The wine cellar presented its own challenges. 8,000 bottle capacity, climate-controlled, racked in custom millwork. The cellar was empty. Filling it with wine for staging purposes would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and raise questions about ownership when the property sold. Leaving it empty looked incomplete. The solution was to install lighting that made the empty racks look intentional, architectural. The cellar was presented as ready for the buyer's collection, not as lacking one. The home theater was fully equipped. 150-inch screen, Dolby Atmos sound, reclining leather seats for 12. The system was tested quarterly to ensure functionality. Showing a theater with dead speakers or a malfunctioning screen would undermine confidence in the entire property. The outdoor spaces were maintained to the same standard. The infinity pool looked like a resort amenity. Lounge chairs set at precise angles, cushions fluffed and spotless, umbrellas positioned for optimal shade. The pool deck was cleaned twice weekly, even in winter when no one would use it. The kitchen was staged as if a chef were moments from arriving. Counters clear except for a designer fruit bowl and a high-end espresso machine. Appliances spotless. The walk-in pantry organized but empty. The 12-foot island centered precisely under pendant lights. Every room had to tell the same story. This estate is not just complete, it is ready. You could move in tomorrow and everything would work. Everything would be perfect. Everything would welcome you. But telling that story, month after month, showing after showing, required constant, invisible effort. The cost of readiness wasn't just financial, it was operational complexity. The estate existed in a permanent state of anticipation, always prepared for an event that might not happen this month, might not happen this year. Meanwhile, the systems aged. The HVAC equipment logged hours. The pool pumps wore incrementally. The automation systems received software updates, but couldn't be updated indefinitely. Eventually, even perfectly maintained equipment reached end of service life and required replacement. The estate was aging in stasis, running without being used, depreciating without providing utility. And the market remained indifferent to this effort. Buyers didn't offer more because the property was impeccably maintained. They expected perfection at this price point. The maintenance bought nothing except the absence of objections. The developers tracked metrics. Cost per showing, approximately $75,000 when carrying costs were amortized across the number of tours. Time between showings, averaging 48 days. Conversion rate, 0%. Each showing generated hope. A serious buyer, finally. Due diligence requests, follow-up questions. Then silence. The estate remained ready. The costs remained steady. The outcome remained uncertain. And readiness, sustained indefinitely without purpose, began to feel less like diligence and more like denial. Every month without occupants made recovery harder. At month 18, the partnership held a quarterly review. The family office representative joined by video. The pension fund sent their real estate analyst. The development group presented current status. The numbers were clear. 18 months of carrying costs, $4.5 million. Marketing expenses, $900,000. Total capital deployed post-completion, $5.4 million. No revenue, no pending offers. The estate's value on the partnership's books remained at $120 million, supported by the original appraisal. But that appraisal was now 2 years old. Market conditions had shifted. Interest rates had risen. Luxury home sales nationally had slowed. Comparables in the region had softened. A new appraisal would likely come in lower. How much lower was uncertain. 10%? 20%? The partnership chose not to order one. Knowing the number wouldn't change the strategy, and a reduced valuation would trigger uncomfortable conversations with lenders and limited partners. The human costs were catalogued elsewhere. The property manager, hired specifically for this project, had spent 18 months maintaining a house no one lived in. Her work was competent and necessary, but it lacked the satisfaction of serving actual residents. The maintenance technicians cycled through the same preventive tasks, fixing nothing that broke, because nothing was being used enough to break. The landscaping crew worked with steady professionalism, but several members had left for jobs with actual homeowners, people who saw and appreciated the gardens they maintained. The estate was becoming a peculiar kind of workplace, perfectly managed but essentially purposeless. A stage maintained for a performance that kept being postponed. The financial pressure was building in subtle ways. The pension fund's quarterly statements showed the investment as stable but non-performing. No distributions, no liquidity events, capital tied up in an asset that generated no yield. Internally, questions were being raised. Not panic, not yet. But questions. Could the price be adjusted? Could the marketing be intensified? Could alternative uses be explored? Corporate retreat center, event venue, some model that generated interim cash flow. Each alternative was examined and set aside. Reducing price now would signal distress. Luxury buyers smelled desperation. A price cut could extend the time to sale rather than shorten it. Intensifying marketing meant spending more money to reach the same small pool of buyers. Diminishing returns. Repurposing for commercial use would require rezoning, modifications to the structure, and an entirely different operational model. It would also make reselling as a residence more difficult. Buyers wanted estates, not former event venues. The decision was to continue. Patience remained the strategy. But patience was expensive. Every month added $250,000 in costs. Every quarter nearly $750,000. The carrying costs were consuming the projected profit margin. At month 12, the partnership had been on track for a 20% return. At month 18, the return had dropped to 12% if the property sold at ask. At month 24, the return would be near break-even. At month 30, the partnership would be losing money even if a buyer appeared at full price. Time had become the enemy. Each passing month without a sale made the economics worse. And worse economics created pressure to make decisions, price cuts, fire sales, compromises that would make the ultimate outcome even less favorable. The property couldn't be abandoned. Too much capital was invested. Lenders held liens. Walking away would trigger foreclosure, personal guarantees, legal liability. The property couldn't be sold at a discount without destroying returns and reputations. So it had to be maintained, perfectly, indefinitely, while the partnership waited for a buyer who might not exist at a price that might no longer be achievable. The staffing costs alone ran $850,000 per year. Salaries, benefits, insurance. The property manager earned $120,000. The assistant property manager $85,000. The maintenance technicians $60,000 each. Contracted services added another $600,000. Landscaping at $320,000. Pool and water features at $80,000. Security at $450,000. IT support at $60,000. These weren't luxuries. They were the minimum required to keep the estate operational. Utilities ran $140,000 per year. Electricity for climate control, lighting, pool heating, water for irrigation and domestic use, even though no one showered or flushed toilets regularly. Gas for the backup generator tests and occasional fireplace use during showings. Insurance, 7-figure annually, covered liability, property, and builders' risk extensions. The policy couldn't be reduced without violating loan covenants. Property taxes arrived twice yearly, predictable and unavoidable. And underneath all the line items ran the cost of time itself. Depreciation. Not the accounting kind, but real physical aging. Systems that ran for 2 years without occupancy weren't pristine. They were 2 years older. When the buyer eventually appeared, they would be purchasing equipment and materials that had been weathering since completion. The estate was depreciating while the costs compounded. And the ultimate brutal arithmetic. If the sale took 5 years, the carrying costs would total $15 million. That $15 million came directly out of profit. A $120 million sale with $220 million in costs plus $15 million in carrying meant the partnership lost money. Time was making the entire project unworkable. The quarterly review ended without resolution. Continue marketing. Maintain the property. Wait for the market to produce a buyer. Everyone on the call understood what wasn't being said. The window was closing. Not yet shut, but closing. And once time ran out, the only options left would be bad ones. Decay would have collapsed the assets narrative. The suggestion surfaced during a conference call at month 21. The family office representative, reading cost reports and seeing no end in sight, asked a question that was simultaneously reasonable and unthinkable. What if we just mothball it? Climate control to minimum settings, landscaping to essential maintenance only. Let it sit until we find a buyer. Silence followed. Then the development group principal responded carefully. That would destroy the value. The explanation took 15 minutes. Luxury real estate operated on perception as much as physical reality. A buyer at 120 million was not purchasing utility. They were purchasing an experience, a lifestyle, a story. The story was, this is the finest property in the region, maintained to exacting standards, ready to provide everything you could want. Mothballing rewrote that story. The new story would be, this property sat vacant for years, was allowed to slip, and is now being dumped by desperate sellers. Even if the physical degradation were minimal, even if the property were brought back to perfection before listing, the narrative would be damaged. Luxury buyers researched extensively. They would discover the gap in maintenance. They would wonder what else had been deferred. They would negotiate aggressively or walk away. The estate's value wasn't intrinsic. It was constructed. Built from materials, yes, but also built from marketing, positioning, perception. Maintaining that construction required continuous effort. Letting the landscaping lapse would be visible within weeks. Native grasses in the meadows would grow tall and go to seed, which was natural but not manicured. The formal gardens would lose their structure. Weeds would establish. The roses would become leggy and diseased. Mulch beds would break down. Within 2 months, the property would look neglected. Within 6 months, it would look abandoned. Bringing it back would require months of work and 6-figure expenditures. And the work would be obvious. New plantings had different maturity than established ones. Fresh mulch looked different than aged mulch. The before and after would be visible to anyone who looked closely. And luxury buyers looked closely. Interior mothballing was equally problematic. Reducing climate control to minimum settings meant humidity fluctuations. Wood floors would gap. Plaster would develop hairline cracks. Fabrics would accumulate moisture and risk mildew. The house might be structurally sound, but it wouldn't feel pristine. Eliminating staff was discussed but rejected for similar reasons. Without daily oversight, small problems would grow. A slow leak in a bathroom could go unnoticed for weeks, causing hidden water damage. A failed circuit breaker could shut down freezers in the empty walk-in refrigerator, leading to mold growth. A pest intrusion, mice, insects, could establish itself before being detected. The estate required vigilance, not because disasters were likely, but because any disaster at this price point was disqualifying. Buyers expected perfection because they had alternatives. There were other estates, other luxury properties. Any flaw, any sign of compromise, gave them an excuse to negotiate or move on. The partnership was trapped by their own standards. They had built at a level that required continuous maintenance. Lowering standards meant lowering value, but maintaining standards meant indefinite expense. The family office representative understood the logic, but it didn't make the costs easier to accept. Another layer existed beneath the practical concerns. Allowing the estate to decay would be an admission that the project had failed, that the buyer wasn't coming, that the model didn't work. As long as maintenance continued, hope remained plausible. The property was perfect. The buyer could arrive tomorrow. The sale could close. The model could prove itself. Stop maintaining and that hope dissolved. The estate would become evidence of failure, not an asset waiting for the right moment. Luxury real estate had an unspoken rule: never show weakness. Projects that faltered were quietly exited through off-market sales or restructurings that kept failure private. Public decay was professional death for developers. It advertised poor judgment and financial distress. The estate had to be maintained not just for the eventual buyer, but for the partnership's reputation. Walking away, letting it slip, would send signals to lenders, investors, and the market. It would make future projects harder to finance, so decay was not an option. The estate would be kept perfect, indefinitely, at whatever cost, because the alternative wasn't just expensive, it was existential. The conference call ended with the decision unchanged: full maintenance, full staffing, full expense. The family office representative asked when the next review would be. "Same time next quarter," came the answer. The call disconnected. Outside, the landscaping crew edged the motor court for the 100th time. The pool filter cycled on schedule. The HVAC system maintained climate zones no one occupied. The estate remained perfect. And empty. And ruinously expensive. And the only thing preventing collapse was the collective willingness to keep paying bills for a house that served no one. Lowering the price would have exposed the truth. At month 24, a luxury real estate consultant delivered her assessment. "You're 20% too high. Maybe 25. 20% off $120 million was $24 million. The partnership's projected profit would evaporate entirely. She recommended repricing at $96 million. Generate urgency. Except that the original model had been optimistic. The partnership thanked her and did not implement her recommendation. Reducing the price by $24 million would make the project unprofitable before accounting for carrying costs. But the financial calculation was secondary to the signaling problem. A 9-figure asking price communicated rarity and singular status. A price reduction communicated the opposite. We were wrong about the value. We overbuilt. We misjudged the market. Luxury buyers researched price history. A $24 million cut would raise questions impossible to answer without admitting miscalculation. The property would become stigmatized, associated with failure regardless of condition. The partnership included a family office with a multi-generational reputation. Taking a $24 million loss would damage that reputation permanently. Future investors would remember, future lenders would price in the risk. The pension fund faced similar constraints. Reporting a loss would require explanations to beneficiaries and regulators. Better to wait, maintain, and hope. The development group's compensation included a percentage of profit at exit. No profit meant no compensation and a damaged track record. So the price held. $120 million. The same number calculated at project inception. Brokers adapted their pitch, emphasizing scarcity over value. There is no other property like this in the region. Buyers toured, admired the architecture, then did their own analysis. The analysis revealed what the partnership knew. The price exceeded what the market would bear. Each month without a sale made the price seem increasingly indefensible. 2 years vacant, $6 million in carrying costs. A buyer would calculate, they're desperate. Wait and offer less. The partnership couldn't afford to appear desperate. The estate was not stalled, it was exclusive. Not overpriced, appropriately valued for its quality. The price could not be reduced because reducing it would require admitting the fundamental premise had been flawed. The estate stayed at $120 million. Perfect, maintained, empty, and increasingly unsellable at that price. Eventually, maintenance stopped protecting value and started consuming it. The inflection point arrived without announcement. It simply became true, visible only in spreadsheets few examined closely. Month 28. $7 million in carrying costs since completion. The original plan had allocated $3 million for 12 months. The overage was $4 million, drawn from reserves meant for distribution. The arithmetic had inverted. Initially, maintenance was an investment. Spend $3 million to preserve $120 million. Justifiable. But as months accumulated, the ratio shifted. $7 million spent, value declining. Maintenance was no longer preserving value, it was eroding it. If the estate sold at asking price tomorrow, construction costs $200 million, land $15 million, carrying costs $7 million, transaction costs $3 million. Total, $225 million. Sale price, $120 million. Loss, $105 million. The estate wouldn't sell at $120 million. That price had produced 0 offers in 28 months. A realistic price was probably $90 million, maybe $85. At $85 million, the loss exceeded $140 million. A younger family office member prepared a memo. Every additional month deepens the loss. Price at $85 million. Absorb the loss. Move on. The memo was acknowledged but not acted upon. Taking an $85 million loss required admitting the entire project had been a mistake. No one was willing to make that admission. The property manager noticed changes. Orders that once cleared in days now took weeks. The landscaping contract renewal took 3 weeks instead of 3 days, with new phrases, given current market conditions and if circumstances change. Internally, alternatives were explored. Subdivide? Zoning didn't permit it. Convert to commercial? Years of permitting. Donate for tax benefit. Benefits would be a fraction of losses. Simply abandon? Systems would degrade, requiring millions in future repairs. Month 32. $8 million in carrying costs. The original 12-month assumption exceeded by nearly 3. Still no buyer. Still no path to recovery without catastrophic loss. The moment when maintenance stopped protecting value had passed months ago. Everyone knew it. No one acted on it. The carrying costs weren't protecting value anymore. They were documenting failure, 1 month at a time. The estate still had owners, just no purpose. The property manager maintained her routine. Morning walkthroughs, contractor coordination, security footage review recording nothing but empty rooms, monthly reports documenting maintenance completed, systems operational, status unchanged. She managed an expensive archive of potential. One maintenance technician, during lunch, tried to articulate the feeling. It's like we're maintaining a museum, except nothing historical happened here. The landscaping crew worked with steady professionalism, but several began looking elsewhere. Not because the work was difficult, but because it lacked feedback. No one sat in the gardens, no one admired the roses. The security guards monitored cameras showing only maintenance staff. One guard calculated 4,000 hours watching an empty estate over 18 months. The work was real, the paycheck was real, the purpose was absent. The family office representative showed frustration. We own a perfect asset that provides nothing. We can't live in it, can't rent it, can't adapt it, can't sell it. What exactly do we own? Technically, a 200-acre parcel with a 73,000 square foot residence, appraised at $120 million. Practically, an obligation to maintain, insure, preserve. Ownership without utility was a particular burden, responsibility without benefit. The estate couldn't be enjoyed or monetized, but couldn't be abandoned. Too much capital invested. Too many reputations attached. The partnership was locked in a loop. They owned because they built. They maintained because they owned. They couldn't sell at viable prices. They couldn't stop maintaining without destroying value. The utility bills arrived monthly, documenting energy consumed for unoccupied space. Climate control for rooms no one entered. Irrigation for gardens no one walked through. The estate consumed resources without producing utility. Maintenance maintaining itself. A broker brought a potential buyer. The property manager prepared everything. Lights, music, temperature, flowers. 90-minute showing. Good questions. The buyer never followed up. The partnership continued funding because stopping would trigger foreclosure. Lenders held first position. Degradation would mean called loans, public foreclosure, catastrophic reputation damage. Better to maintain. Better to wait. Better to preserve the possibility that somehow a buyer would appear. The staff maintained professionalism. Everyone performed their roles. The performance said, "This estate is ready." But the performance had no audience except themselves. Ownership without utility meant paying for permanence without purpose. That decision had not come in 33 months. The partnership had no reason to believe it would come in the next 33. But they continued, because stopping would mean admitting that ownership in this case was just an expensive illusion. 9:04 p.m. Once people disappear, only spreadsheets remain. The estate existed in two forms now: the physical form, marble floors, climate-controlled rooms, and the accounting form. The accounting form was more real. The estate remained on the books at $120 million. Accounting standards didn't require write-downs until a sale was imminent. The partnership wasn't ready to declare impairment. The pension fund's quarterly statements showed the investment as stable. No revenue, but no recognized loss. The asset existed in a category called development properties held for sale. It had existed there for 34 months. Internally, different calculations were happening. At month 34, carrying costs totaled $8.5 million. If the estate sold at $120 million, the return was barely positive. At $90 million, the loss exceeded $135 million. These calculations existed in spreadsheets labeled internal use only. The family office's wealth manager ran opportunity cost numbers. Capital tied up here could have returned 4 to 5% annually elsewhere. Over 3 years, $27 million in foregone returns. Add carrying costs, and the true economic loss approached $160 million. None of these calculations appeared in official partnership documents. They were private reckonings, individual attempts to quantify what everyone felt. The project had failed. Property taxes arrived twice yearly, $750,000 paid without question. Insurance premiums, $180,000 quarterly. Paid automatically, recorded, filed. The estate had become an accounting entity that happened to have physical form. Every invoice was filed meticulously. Not for operations, the property manager handled that, but for eventual justification. These records would support the narrative. We maintained institutional-grade standards throughout. At month 36, the partnership held an annual review. 3 years post-completion, $9 million in carrying costs, 0 revenue. Updated projections, best case, sale at $100 million within 12 months. Total loss, $134 million. Likely scenario, sale at $85 million within 24 months. Total loss, $168 million. No one presented the worst case. Everyone understood it. The meeting concluded with the same decision. Continue marketing, maintain the property, wait for market improvement. The decision was rational only within the context of losses already incurred. Stopping wouldn't recover sunk costs. It would crystallize them. The estate existed primarily as entries in financial systems, maintained by people who would never live there, for owners who couldn't acknowledge what they actually owned. Evidence of miscalculation at institutional scale. Rescue required inheriting the same math. At month 37, word circulated quietly. The estate was open to serious offers. 3 inquiries arrived within weeks, not from end buyers but from opportunistic investors. The first offer, $65 million, cash, 30-day close. Against $225 million in costs, a loss of $160 million. Declined. The second inquiry proposed acquiring at $70 million, subdividing the land, demolishing the main house, building smaller luxury homes. The proposal required destroying everything that had been built. The partnership couldn't accept that. It meant admitting the entire concept had been wrong. Declined. The third approach came from a hotel group. They saw potential for an ultra-luxury boutique hotel. They offered $55 million and proposed a management agreement. Converting to commercial use would take years, and $55 million was worse than previous offers. Declined. Each offer confirmed what the partnership hadn't wanted to face. The market's actual valuation was $65 million or less. Everything above that existed only in internal accounting. But accepting market valuation meant accepting catastrophic realized loss. As long as the property remained unsold, the loss was unrealized. Theoretical. The fundamental problem: rescue required someone willing to inherit the property's burden. At $120 million, no one was interested. At market value, buyers would fundamentally change what the estate was. Buy at 65, hold 5 years, resell at 90. That required reducing maintenance dramatically. Let gardens naturalize. Run climate control at minimum. Accept slow degradation. No one wanted to maintain it at current standards except the partnership, and they were trapped. A broker suggested auction. Luxury. Auctions were public, attracted press, and typically produced prices 20 to 30% below already reduced valuations. An auction meant selling at $50 million, maybe $55, plus public humiliation. Rejected immediately. Another broker proposed finding international buyers. Marketing materials were prepared in Mandarin and Arabic. Tours were arranged. The feedback was consistent. Beautiful property, wrong location. International buyers wanted coastal access or major city proximity. By month 40, everyone understood. No one would rescue this property at a price the partnership could accept. The math that trapped the partnership would trap any buyer at similar prices. At lower prices, buyers existed. But they would transform the property or let it degrade. Rescue was possible, but only at prices that made rescue not worth pursuing. This estate isn't abandoned, it's preserved. Month 42. The landscaping crew arrived as scheduled. The gardens looked exactly as they had at completion. A visitor would see perfection. Nothing suggested 42 months of vacancy. But preservation without purpose created a peculiar state. Physically maintained, but economically dead. It consumed resources without generating value. Perfect stasis, waiting for a function that might never arrive. The property manager wondered what would happen if everyone simply stopped. The systems would fail within months. Within a year, the property would need millions in remediation. So she continued, because stopping would destroy the value everyone was trying to preserve. The estate existed in a category without terminology. Not abandoned, every system worked. Not occupied. No one lived there. Not mothballed. Maintenance was full scale. It was maintained unlived space. A house performing all functions except the essential one, sheltering people. $10.5 million in carrying costs now. The partnership's annual reports mentioned it as residential development asset under marketing. Status: held for sale. The pension fund's beneficiaries had no way to know that one line item represented a property consuming cash with no return in sight. The development group's founder visited once in month 42. He walked through rooms he had specified, materials he had selected. Everything was as intended. Better than intended. Execution had been flawless. He stood in the primary suite looking at mountain views. The room was perfect and completely pointless. He left without comment. The estate would continue being maintained. The partnership had no alternative. But everyone understood. This wasn't maintenance in service of occupation. It was maintenance in service of accounting fiction. The physical reality was perfection. The economic reality was irreversible loss. These realities existed simultaneously without contradiction. The estate was maintained, unlived, unrecoverable. Those three conditions would persist until someone decided preservation was no longer worth its cost. That moment hadn't arrived yet, but everyone felt it approaching. This estate isn't unique, it's instructional. The pattern has historical precedent. Gilded Age mansions along Fifth Avenue, most demolished within 50 years. Too expensive to maintain once fortunes dispersed. The Vanderbilt homes, the Astor properties, many survived only by becoming museums. Hollywood estates of the 1920s, built for silent film stars with 10-year careers. Most subdivided or demolished when economics shifted. Japanese bubble economy properties, trophy buildings in Tokyo and Osaka, built with limitless budgets, sold at fractions of cost when the bubble collapsed. Some still sit, maintained minimally, waiting for markets that haven't returned in 30 years. The pattern isn't about taste or timing, it's about arithmetic. Certain scales create maintenance obligations that exceed utility. The properties become institutional burdens. This estate fit the pattern perfectly. 73,000 square feet required maintenance intensity that made sense only for institutional use or generational wealth. But institutions wanted headquarters, not homes. And generational wealth increasingly preferred multiple smaller properties over one concentration of assets. The model assumed permanent wealth concentration. But even ultra-high net worth families were diversifying geographically, preferring flexibility over singular trophy properties. Other examples existed in the region. A 40,000 square foot mountain compound listed 8 years before selling at 60% of asking. A lakefront estate eventually converted to a corporate retreat center at significant loss. The commonality? Properties built at scales where carrying costs eventually exceeded owner patience. This estate would follow the pattern. The likely outcome was eventual forced sale. Lenders would lose patience. Partnership reserves would deplete. Market exhaustion would force price. Acceptance, the estate would sell, but not at numbers that validated the model, at numbers that proved the model had been wrong from inception. What made this instructional was clarity. The estate isolated one variable. What happens when maintenance costs exceed an asset's ability to generate return? The answer: slow-motion collapse. Not dramatic failure, but economic erosion. The asset persists physically while becoming untenable financially. The pattern would repeat. Somewhere, another development group was planning another trophy estate. Running models assuming 12-month absorption, calculating carrying costs that seemed manageable for 1 year. They would build excellently, complete on schedule, market professionally, and encounter the same arithmetic. Too few buyers, too specific requirements, too expensive to maintain. The pattern repeated because incentives driving luxury development didn't account for carrying cost risk. Development fees were earned during construction, profits projected at sale. The gap between, the maintenance period, was treated as brief, until it wasn't brief. And then all the careful planning confronted reality. Maintaining unused luxury was ruinously expensive, and no amount of maintenance made buyers appear faster. This estate documented the pattern completely. Nothing was mismanaged. Every decision was defensible, and still the project failed. That failure taught something uncomfortable. Some assets cannot be maintained profitably at the scale they're built. The estate would eventually find an ending, but the pattern would continue, because institutional confidence would continue producing properties that made sense in models but not in markets.